Modern literature 1400 to 1600. Geoffrey Chaucer 1340 to 1400. Chaucer was born between 1340 to 1345, probably in London. His father was a prosperous wine merchant. In 1357 he was a page in the household of Elizabeth de Burgh, Countess of Ulster, wife of Prince Lionel. He was captured by the French during the Brittany expedition of 1359 but was ransomed by the King Edward III. Edward III later sent him to France on a diplomatic mission. He also travelled to Genoa and Florence. Around 1366, Chaucer married Philippa Rowett, a lady-in-waiting in the Queen's household. Philippa's sister, Catherine Swynford, later became the third wife of John of Gaunt, King's fourth son and Chaucer's patron. In 1374 Chaucer was appointed controller of the lucrative London customs. In 1386 he was elected Member of Parliament for Kent and also served as a Justice of Peace. In 1389, he was made Clerk of the King's Works, overseeing loyal building projects. He held a number of royal posts serving both Edward III and his successor Richard II. Chaucer lived during Edward III, 1327 to 1377. Richard II, 1377 to 1399. Henry IV, 1399 to 1413. He was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey, now known as the Poets' Corner. Occleve wrote a famous poem, The Regiment of Princess, on the death of Chaucer. Chaucer and Langland died in the same year, 1400. Chaucer has been criticized for presenting about courts and cultivated classes and neglect the suffering of the poor. Titles given to Chaucer. He was the first national poet of England. He is called Father of English Poetry and Grandfather of English Novel. He is called Morning Star of Song, and Morning Star of Renaissance. Dryden called Chaucer the Father of English Poetry. Arnold called him Father of English Poetry. Chaucer introduced felicity in English. Chaucer has been called the Prince of Plagiarists. Quotations about Chaucer. Chaucer was not in any sense a poet of the people by Hudson. Dryden said about him, "Here is God's plenty and a rough diamond, and must first be polished ere he shines." Arnold says about him, Chaucer lacks not only the accent of Dante but also the high seriousness. And Chaucer is the earliest of the great moderns. Albert called Chaucer the earliest of the great moderns and the morning star of Renaissance. Chaucer found his native tongue a dialect and left it a language, by Lowes. If Chaucer is the father of English poetry, he is the grandfather of English novel. By G.K. Chesterton. Edmund Spenser in his Faerie Queene called Chaucer, well of English undefiled. The works of his life can be divided into three periods. French period, 1359 to 1372. During this time, Chaucer translated the Roman de la Rose, a French poem written during the 1200s. This book was almost a translated version of French work Le Roman de la Rose, Jean de Meun and Guillaume de Loris. Chaucer's extensive reading of Latin poets such as Boethius also influenced his own work. He also wrote his Book of the Duchess, an elegiac poem that shared much with contemporary French poetry of the time but also departed from that poetry in important ways. He is the first one to use ottava rima in the Book of the Duchess. Ottava rima is the 8-syllable line in couplet rhyming. This book was written on the death of the Duchess Blanche, who was the wife of John of Gaunt, patron of Chaucer. She belongs to Lancaster. This book is an elegy and allegory in nature. It comprises 1,300 lines. 2 Italian period 1372 to 1385. In 1372 Chaucer has been to Italy and came in personal contact with Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. The important works of this period are Troilus and Criseyde, the Parlement of Foles, the House of Fame and the Legend of Good Women. Troilus and Criseyde. He first used rhyme royal in Troilus and Cressida. Rhyme royal is 10-syllable line arranged in 7-line stanza, ABABBCC. Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida is called novel in verse. Had Chaucer written in prose, it is possible his Troilus and Cressida and not Richardson's Pamela would be celebrated as first English novel, by S. D. Neal. The Parliament of Foles, 1382. It is a 699-line poem in rhyme royal by Geoffrey Chaucer, written in 1380–90. Composed in the tradition of French romances. The Legend of Good Women, 1385. He first used heroic couplet in the Legends of Good Women. Heroic couplet is 10-syllable line rhyming in couplets, i.e. decasyllabic couplet. In the Legends of Good Women, the 9 legends are Cleopatra, Thisbe, Dido, Hypsipyle, Medea, Lucaris, Ariadne, Philomela, Phyllis, and Hypermnestra. 3 English period, 1386 to 1400. The famous work of this period is Canterbury Tales, which was written after influence of Boccaccio's The Decameron.